We humans think of ourselves as pretty sturdy. After all, we can survive in extreme climates all around the world, go for days without food and water, and even lose significant amounts of blood with little or no problem. But really, outside the realm of normal conditions we experience day to day here on Earth, we're pretty fragile if you think about it. Today, I'm looking at the limits of human survivability. Now, of course, nearly all of these limits are subjective at best because no two people are identical, and natural variation might make you better or worse suited to handle harsh conditions than the next guy. Plus, solid data on many of these limits is difficult to find, because, after all, who's going to sign up for an experiment with the express purpose of figuring out what can kill you? Now, please understand that I'm not advocating for anybody to actually try anything on this list. Really, don't do it. Anyway, let's start with temperature and humidity. Most people are comfortable at a standard room temperature around 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, depending on the season and humidity. Survival in extreme temperatures, particularly on the hot end, is extremely dependent on humidity. The more humid the air, the smaller the effect of your body's natural response to being too hot, sweating. Additionally, the period of time that you're exposed, of course, is a major effect. At 50% humidity, 49 degrees Celsius is lethal in as few as 10 minutes, with a sustained 38 Celsius survivable for only hours. Long term, temperatures around 35 degrees can kill you in a week or so from stress on the body due to heat. On the frosty end of the temperature range, a core temperature, meaning internal body temperature, below 35 degrees Celsius is considered hypothermia. At 32.7 degrees, your heart rate slows and your senses and thoughts become impaired. In reaction to the cold, your body begins to shiver, making tiny muscle movements in an attempt to generate heat and warm you up. The colder you get, the harder it becomes to move, and your heart rate and breathing both decrease further. As your core reaches below 29 degrees, you may lose consciousness. The core temperature around which most people perish is 21 degrees. However, a handful of individuals have survived much lower core temperatures. For instance, in 1999, Anna Bogenholm survived several hours at a core temperature of 13.7 degrees, a record at the time, after falling into a frigid stream while skiing. Though she lost consciousness after 40 minutes and her heart stopped beating for at least 3 hours, the cold actually preserved her vital organs, and doctors were able to warm her up and resuscitate her. After spending 10 days in a coma, she regained consciousness and discovered she was paralyzed from the neck down due to severe nerve damage from the cold. However, after years of physical therapy, she eventually regained full use of her body. Alright, next, let's look at how many G's of force the body can survive. This one is tricky. Effects depend heavily on where the force is exerted and for how long. Vertical G-force, as in along the axis of the spine with force pushing towards the feet, tolerances range from 5G for the average person to 9 or 10G for fighter pilots for brief intervals of time. So-called negative G-force, where the force is applied upward from the feet, is much more deadly, with between 2 and 3G generally being the max. Any more than this, and delicate blood vessels in the brain sustain irreversible, deadly damage. In terms of horizontal G-force, where the force is along an axis perpendicular to the spine, higher forces are survivable. In the 50s and 60s, when the US Air Force was conducting rocket sled tests with the purpose of determining how many Gs were survivable, volunteer John Stapp survived a horizontal deceleration force of 46.2 G in a test where his sled went from Mach 0.9, nearly the speed of sound, to a full stop in just over a second. Another potentially lethal situation is oxygen deprivation. I'm breaking this section up into two categories: situations like holding your breath, where supply is cut off suddenly, and situations such as high altitude, where oxygen levels dwindle more gradually. Let's start with the first category. This one is heavily dependent on the individual, but as a general rule, the better shape you're in, the longer you can hold your breath. Most people can go for between 30 seconds and 1 minute without harm. Cut off oxygen for more than 1 minute, and brain cells begin to die. After 4 minutes, irreversible brain damage is likely, and in 6 to 10 minutes, inevitable and potentially deadly. In terms of oxygen deprivation at altitude, approximately 6,000 meters is the upper survivable limit for anyone without extensive training and proper time to acclimate. Even with training and acclimation, altitudes of 7,000 meters above sea level prove incredibly difficult for even the most experienced climber, and oxygen tanks are required for all but the shortest exposures. Smarter Every Day has a great video on the effects of oxygen deprivation at high altitude. Go check it out if you want to learn more. It's unclear exactly how long humans can survive without sleep, or even what the record for the longest time gone without sleeping is. We do know it's at least 11 days. In 1964, high school student Randy Gardner went 11 days and 24 minutes without sleeping. it is quite difficult to find verified, well-documented instances of people going for very long without sleeping. After enough hours awake, people tend to lapse into a sleep-like state for very short periods of time, often with their eyes open, called microsleeps, and without a trained observer or medical equipment monitoring subjects 24/7, it's nearly impossible to know when microsleeps occur. For this reason, and to avoid people dying in the attempt to go without sleep, the Guinness Book of World Records has not tracked this record for decades. Ionizing radiation, the high-energy, harmful kind, is measured in sieverts. The average human absorbs around 0.05 microsieverts annually, both from natural and man-made sources. Health problems such as nausea, vomiting, and degradation of red blood cells take place during rapid absorption of about 1 sievert. Absorbing 2 sieverts can cause significant damage to vital organs. Absorbing 4 sieverts over a short time is enough to kill you if you do not receive proper medical treatment, and exposure to more than 8 sieverts means certain death. At Chernobyl, workers and emergency response teams were exposed to more than 50 sieverts of radiation over the course of just minutes. The human body contains between 10 and 12 pints of blood. When you give blood, you typically lose around 10% of your total volume, which at most may make you feel slightly faint. At 20 to 30% of blood lost, your heart begins to beat faster as it attempts to maintain normal blood pressure and exchange oxygen adequately with significantly less blood, and other symptoms such as shortness of breath, wooziness, weakness, and cold occur. Amazingly, even blood loss of up to 40% of total volume is often survivable if replaced quickly enough. First off, let's establish that it's current, not voltage, that kills you, which is measured in amperes. A current of just 1,000th of an amp is enough to cause a tingling sensation, and at 100th of an amp, the current begins to cause pain. At 1/10 of an amp, you totally lose control of your muscles and are unable to let go of the wire shocking you. A current of between 0.1 and 0.2 amps causes your heart to enter a state of uncontrollable spasming called ventricular fibrillation, preventing it from effectively pumping blood through your body, and this leads to death within minutes. Interestingly, a current of more than 0.2 amps is actually more survivable because it causes such powerful muscle spasms that your heart actually locks up, preventing it from entering ventricular fibrillation. However, severe burns are probable, and breathing ceases because your lungs are unable to expand and contract. If you are somehow able to let go of the source of this shock and receive immediate medical attention, your odds of survival are decent. This depends heavily on a number of factors, including temperature, humidity, and relative health, but in general, 3 to 4 days deprived of water is the point at which death due to dehydration begins to occur, with a full week being the upper limit of survivability. We can go for much longer without food, as long as we remain at least reasonably well hydrated. Gandhi famously fasted for 21 days in 1943 at the age of 74. More recently, well-documented hunger strikes by political prisoners have lasted as long as 40 days. This one is interesting. Without external pressure, all the gases in your body expand rapidly and liquids begin to evaporate. This means that if you attempted to hold your breath, your lungs would explode. Additionally, gases dissolved in your blood, such as nitrogen, would begin to boil and form pockets of gas that interfere with your circulation and could potentially cause cardiac arrest. Finally, mucous membranes, such as your eyes, nose, and mouth, would rapidly lose moisture and freeze over. So, maybe close your eyes. Though few human cases of total exposure to vacuum have ever taken place, let's look now at an accident that took place at the Johnson Space Center in 1965. A technician working in a vacuum chamber accidentally unplugged a hose from his vacuum suit, causing rapid depressurization and a loss of consciousness after only 15 seconds. Fortunately, he was rescued 12 seconds later by monitoring staff, and reported that the last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the sensation of his tongue boiling. He also reported being unable to taste anything for days after the incident, but was not permanently affected by the experience. Taking all this into account, along with data from some NASA experiments on animals in the 1960s that I really don't have time to discuss thoroughly enough, it's likely that you could survive total exposure to vacuum for up to 2.5 or 3 minutes without long-lasting negative effects. Just don't hold your breath. Well, that's about all I've got for this video. Like I said at the beginning, most of these things are very subjective. I did avoid things like disease and poison on purpose because there's just so much variation, but please let me know if I missed anything else. You can follow me on Twitter @Preclude. I try and keep it updated with progress on videos and whatever else. See you next time, and thanks for watching.